All right, so it's preparing to live stream the meeting. So as soon as that screen changes, I'll be able to have a link that I can give you.
Oh, looks like Zoom's giving me a link right now.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah, I can see myself on YouTube.
All right, cool. I'm gonna mute that. Yeah, it's got a bit of a delay, but we should be good. Let's tweet this out real quick. And everybody's going to be watching us just kind of tweet this out for the first couple seconds.
Yeah.
All right. Mine just went out to Twitter.
All right.
Good to go. All right. I'm going to kind of keep one eye on chat here, and I'll have another eye on our document. All right. Should we just jump into it?
Yeah, for sure. I'm opening up the chat too.
Cool. All right. Well, hi everybody who's watching.
Hey, we got
We're
a
here.
few.
We've got some people. Who would know? Who'd funk? So I'm here with Jason Bahl. I'm sure many of you know him already. But yeah, we just kind of want to talk today just about kind of our thoughts on kind of WordPress in general, GraphQL, Gatsby, Headless WordPress, and just kind of we feel like how it kind of fits into the current way we use WordPress and web development in general. So maybe let's just start out with some quick introductions. Do you want to take it away, Jason?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jason Bahl. Been doing WordPress development for somewhere over a decade at this point, I think 11, 12 years or so. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and I work at Gatsby, which is a startup that builds really, we build open source software for developers to build really fast React-based sites and apps. And my full-time job with Gatsby is to maintain and push forward WP GraphQL, which is a GraphQL API for WordPress plugin.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So what exactly is WP GraphQL? I mean, it sounds like that's kind of your full-time job, but what is that exactly?
Yeah. So WP GraphQL, it's a WordPress plugin. It's a free open source WordPress plugin that you can install to your WordPress site, and it will turn your WordPress site into a GraphQL server. And what that means is it would enable an endpoint. So you'd have your site.com/GraphQL, and it would allow you to use the GraphQL query language to interact with data from WordPress. GraphQL is a specification for querying and mutating data, and it's backend agnostic. So there's implementations of GraphQL in WordPress now. There's PHP, JavaScript, Ruby, Scala, Node, like anything you can think of, GraphQL can work with. So my project brings GraphQL to WordPress, and yeah.
Nice. So that's completely something brand new for WordPress. They have the REST API, but what would you kind of say like would be different from the REST API? Because most people know what that is and may use that, but what kind of advantages does GraphQL bring to the table?
Shoot. Sorry, my audio is being funky. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, my audio dropped out for a second. I believe you were asking like, what's the difference between GraphQL and REST? Okay,
yeah,
because I lost audio for a second. So yeah, some of the big differences. I'll start with some of the similarities actually. So REST API, folks use a REST API to get data from WordPress or send data to WordPress in JSON format. REST is resource-based, so you would have an endpoint per resource. So if you want to interact with post data, you would have a post endpoint. Tags or categories each have their own endpoints. Users, comments, things like that, they all have their own endpoints. You can hit an endpoint and you get a payload of data. So getting up and running with REST is pretty quick. But GraphQL is different in that you get one endpoint and it defines a schema of what's possible. And then you, the consumer, get to decide what resources you want to ask for. So you would write a query, say you want to ask for posts, and on the post you want the ID and the title, and then maybe you also want related resources like the author of the post and the featured image of the post. You can ask for all of that in one request, where in REST you would have to make multiple requests. Like you'd have to get the post, which would have an ID for the featured image, and then you'd have to make a follow-up request to get the featured image and a follow-up request to get the author. So GraphQL allows you to do these related resource requests in a single request. And it's actually faster to do so because one, you're not doing round trips back and forth to the server, but then also you're only asking the server to process data that you actually need, where REST is going to send you entire resources, even if you don't need it. Like if you want a list of post IDs and titles and you don't need the content, well, REST is still going to process filters on the content and ask you to download the entire content string, which could be lengthy, right? So, so GraphQL is going to be faster on multiple facets, but in both cases, you're still dealing with JSON data.
Yeah, so it sounds like kind of the main differences here is that when you're kind of dealing with a REST API, and I'm a front end developer. It sounds like, I hit /posts and I just kind of get what I get with that. I'm not really in charge of the data that I'm receiving other than data related to posts. And that could mean, a lot of different things, right? Whereas with GraphQL, kind of me on the front end, I can say I want posts, but I want the title, I want the excerpt, and I want the date that it was published, and I can just ask GraphQL for those pieces of data, nothing more, nothing less, and that way the load is only exactly what I asked for. Does that kind of sound about right?
Yeah, and I'll touch base real quick too. We've talked about this before, but like the reason WP GraphQL even came to be. I'll touch base on that real quick. So I was working at a newspaper for 4 years, and we did a lot of content syndication. So that would mean like we had a paper in Denver, for example, Denver, Colorado, and a paper, an hour away in Boulder, Colorado, that had a lot smaller staff. So let's say Broncos win the Super Bowl, Denver has staff covering a story like that. They publish it. Boulder wants to get that published to their site as well. So Denver would just be able to, type the story up, click publish, and select which sites across our network it should publish to. So this whole concept of syndicating content. We had syndication, whatever platform or whatever you want to call it, all built on top of the REST API. And we scaled our network from one WordPress site when I started to 54 sites in a 4-year span. And as we started to scale, we ran into a lot of scaling issues with the REST API setup. And when I say scale in this context, there's two terms. There's the actual performance of the syndication. So it went from like very fast when we had only 2 sites talking to each other to very slow when we had up to 54 sites you could send a story to. And then the other part of scale would be like scaling a code base so that a team with multiple people on it could jump into the code and understand what's happening and effectively debug or enhance, add new features, things like that. So one big difference between GraphQL and REST that drew us to it, the performance on the server was great. That was a big reason we had to solve that problem because we were having performance issues.
Right.
But the code scalability is a big win for a team if you have multiple people working on a code base. Because with REST, requests are implicit. So what that means is you say, hey, I want a list of posts, but you don't really have that much control over what you're getting. You're just saying, hey, server, send me something. And you're just kind of crossing your fingers that it's going to be what you want. Where with GraphQL, the requests are so you write you write a very explicit query saying these are the exact fields that I want and what resources I want. And so,
Lost your audio.
can you hear me?
Yep, we're good.
All right, sorry about that.
That's good.
Yeah, Zoom's being pretty funky for me. But yeah, so what that means is like a developer can hop into a code base 6 months from now and look at a GraphQL query. And if something's not working, they know the intent of the person who wrote the code because the GraphQL query is so explicit. Like there's no way to miss that 6 months ago, we wanted these fields. Okay, something might not be working today, but at least we know what the intent was and can hop in right away and fix it. Where with REST, you got it takes a lot of time to hop back in and be like, okay, how did this endpoint used to work and what has changed? You have to be an expert on both sides, like the server and the consumer side. And there's a good chance that REST API is not documented well, where GraphQL has built-in introspection documentation. So while it's not perfect, it brings a lot of benefits of just being able to hop in and understand what data is available to you.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think that that's a really good advantage to GraphQL, because when you're building out a REST API, documentation is like 100% necessary in order to know what's going on. Like in order to match an endpoint to its data structure and what it needs in order to work, you have to have some sort of underlying documentation going on, and that needs to be up to date. And as if you're trying to move, rapidly, then sometimes things get missed. Sometimes, it just isn't complete documentation. And I mean, as developers, all of us, I'm sure we've all ran into poor documented REST APIs. Whereas with GraphQL, it's a little bit harder because harder to mess up, I guess, because you have that introspective, documentation. That it's just like you can kind of describe the fields as you're creating them, and then all of a sudden you just kind of get that as the consumer of it. So I think it's really cool that that's an option. And I would imagine that it was probably really good from scalability within the company itself. Like in a previous conversation we had, like you were talking about that the documentation or the ability to grab pieces of data is better because each team only needs certain pieces.
Yeah, that was another thing we were solving. We had our content syndication for our web team, but then we also had a native iOS and Android apps and a data team that fetched a bunch of data from WordPress and merged it with stuff from like Google Analytics and stuff all over the web to like understand our audience, right? And so they needed certain things, like they were trying to do things like, collect word count from articles and the time of day it was published and, try and correlate that with different things, right? So they needed their own sets of data. The web team needed its own set of data, and then the native team needed different sets of data. So what ended up happening for us, we built like REST APIs that tried to solve every team's problem, right? So we had two approaches we could go with REST. We could build like these God endpoints that had like all the data imaginable and then let the teams figure it out from there.
But then you're building a God endpoint.
Exactly. And performance suffered very greatly. Or we could spend the time and build like these very feature specific endpoints, like posts for mobile, posts for data team, posts for web team.
Yeah.
But then we're on the hook maintaining that. And then like if the mobile team has a change, like then we have to go through and figure out, okay, what works just for the mobile team and how can we change it without affecting things for the other teams? Where with GraphQL, we could just say, here, we're going to expose everything in a schema and give the graphical editor to these different teams. GraphQL is like an IDE for testing queries and mutations. It's a fantastic open source piece of software. It's just like a React component that gives you introspection into GraphQL server. But we would hand that to the different teams and they'd go weeks, months, even without having to ask us questions because the schema is pretty like you learn it just by like searching and like if you want to query posts, you type the word post and you can see all the ways you can interact with posts. And there's like a feature called like a query explorer where you can like just click check boxes and it will build a query for you. So tools like that don't really exist in many REST APIs that I've ever come across, make you so much more efficient at your job and like confident that your code is working too.
Yeah, like when you're thinking about like kind of this on an enterprise level, like the fact that your team was not bugged for weeks on end to like make all these new endpoints and stuff, you probably would have stayed so tied down to just trying to, you know, plate spin essentially with these endpoints. And now when you introduce GraphQL versus the REST API, now all of a sudden your team is freed up to do whatever else it needs to do. And the fact that you weren't getting questions is huge. Let's see here. We have
Can you
some
hear me?
question. Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. My wife just informed me that lights are flickering in the house, so I might lose power. Just
Okay.
like internet might just go out.
All right. If that happens, we'll just pause and we'll pick this up again later. But anyway, so yeah, huge advantages on an enterprise level. And then as like just a front end developer, you can still like have that same advantage those other teams were having, just where you can just kind of pluck the data that you need to when you need and
Yeah.
just kind of move on.
Oh, there's one feature too. I don't know if I've talked to you or how familiar you are with this, but there's a feature in GraphQL called Fragments. Are you familiar with Fragments?
Yep.
So this is one big advantage of GraphQL compared to REST. So there's this concept called fragments that allow you to like define specific sets of fields in what's called a fragment, and then you can use that fragment inside a query. So what you can do in like component-based architectures like React single page apps or Vue apps or whatever, you can build a fragment for a specific component. So let's say you're querying a list of posts, and on each post you want the author's first name, last name, and avatar. You could define a fragment called author, and on the author fragment, you could ask for the author's first name, last name, and avatar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can keep that fragment inside the same component that renders the author information. So, and then higher up in your application, you'll have a component that's responsible for the list of posts or the single post, right? And that component can import the author component and the author fragment. So that allows the author component to control the data that it renders. So over time, if your manager comes to you and says, hey, we also need to put the author email address on here, you don't have to like go through your whole application and figure out, okay, we fetch data over here, we transform it here, and then we pass it down. No, you can go straight to the author component. You edit your markup that's going to render the email address. And right there, you have a fragment that asks for the first name, last name. You just add the email address to that fragment, and your query automatically has that next time your application runs. Or same thing, vice versa. If you need to delete fields, you just clean it out of your markup in the component, clean it out of the fragment, and your tech debt cleans up itself as you go.
That's awesome.
It's like this amazing feature, and you can have multiple fragments. It's like if you had a component that's just for like the title, and it has like the title, the date, and the author first and last name, and then you have a different component for the content and a different component for something at the footer of the article, right? You can have multiple fragments on the same query and divide your stuff up into these small fragments. So it's this amazing thing that just like cannot be done well in REST.
Yeah. No, that's huge. Being like as currently in the company that I'm doing, our past year and probably the rest of this year is cleaning up tech debt. That's kind of like most of the developers on my team have kind of inherited this from just years past. And so that alone, just being able to organize your data is huge. And like now with kind of GraphQL and all that, you're having the ability to fragment out your modularize your queries and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you are able to kind of maintain that blob of tech debt over the years. And that's huge, especially when you're working for large companies, because that's ultimately kind of the bane of that. There was a question in chat that I want to address, which was about using WP GraphQL and page builders together. And we talked about a little bit like this. And so I just wanted to kind of quickly pick your brain about how page builders work with GraphQL.
Yeah. So
WP GraphQL.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So if you've ever talked to me in Gutenberg, you know I have feelings about Gutenberg. I'll start at Gutenberg though. since Gutenberg is in WordPress core now and is effectively a page builder, whether you want to call it that or not, it is a page builder. And it's becoming one more every day. But so the problem with Gutenberg right now, and I have an issue. I think it's, if you go to the Gutenberg GitHub repo, I believe it's issue 2751. And I've written like a book about this long before it was in WordPress core. We're talking like over a year before it was in WordPress core. I brought this problem to the core team that was working on Gutenberg. But there's no server-side registry for Gutenberg blocks. And so what that means, we're building all our blocks in JavaScript, 100% JavaScript. So the WordPress server doesn't really know anything about blocks. So that means server tools like WPCLI, XML-RPC, the WordPress REST API, and WP GraphQL have no knowledge of blocks. They don't know what blocks exist. They don't know what blocks have been registered. They don't know what attributes blocks can have. They don't even know how to sanitize and validate data properly when you save it to the database, which just like blows my mind that we ship this to 30% of the internet without being able to validate data before we save it. I don't understand it. But anyway.
You have feelings on the matter.
So since there is no, oh shoot, did my audio drop?
Nope, you're good.
Oh, okay. But yeah, so since there's no server API, server tools like a REST API, CLI, whatever, can't make use of blocks. You can't run a CLI command to list blocks or find blocks on pages or anything like that. REST API has no endpoints for blocks, right? There's the persisted blocks or whatever they call that feature, like the reusable blocks. Since those are stored in the database, those can have an endpoint, but those are the only ones. Like you can't just generally get a list of existing blocks because the server has no knowledge of it. So WP GraphQL doesn't support it out of the box because Gutenberg doesn't support itself. So Peter Pristis, though, is somebody in the community that built an extension called WP GraphQL Gutenberg. The way that works, it fires up Gutenberg in an iframe in the WordPress admin. You get a settings page, and it'll fire up like a hidden iframe, so you never see this happening, but it fires up Gutenberg, gets the registry of all registered blocks in JavaScript from that iframe that's running Gutenberg, and then it stores that registry from JavaScript, sends it back to the server to store in database. I believe in the options table. I'd have to double check. And then now the server can have knowledge of it, right? It can load the options table, the whole schema of registered blocks, and then map that to the GraphQL schema.
Mm-hmm.
So that works to a degree. But Gutenberg, you can have certain conditions where you like deregister blocks if it's a certain post type or a certain user even, or whatever condition you can think of, you can add or remove blocks. So loading up an iframe to get the registry is great, but if you have different contexts where the blocks change, that registry might be inaccurate. That is stored back in the options table. So it's not like super scalable, where if everything was registered on the server and ran through WordPress hooks and filters, then you'd have a final source of truth that you can map to something like a GraphQL schema or CLI or REST API.
Yeah, it sounds like that was definitely something that it kind of takes a step out of the normal workflow of WordPress and kind of it maims some of the other tools that would normally take advantage of that kind of thing. So, but
yeah, so that said, it depending on your project, extensions like the WP GraphQL Gutenberg, they might meet your needs. Like
if every block is available on every page.
Yeah, exactly. Or for smaller projects where you have a lot of control over the project. For bigger projects, like I came from a newspaper with like many different developers on the team, and we had like thousands of content creators across our network. So like we had to be very predictable about what we were allowing people to do and what data we were allowing to be saved and what data we were outputting. And so like for us, no way. Like it's just too unpredictable. But Elementor, I think is one of the other page builders that I know you've done work with. They do have server-side registry, like you register the widgets or elements or whatever they're called on the server. I know you've experimented with it. You've got a video about it. I have not personally experimented with it, but since the blocks or elements are registered on the server, you should be able to read the registered blocks or elements and map it to the WP GraphQL schema in some way, and consume blocks with WP GraphQL. I haven't personally explored it, but if the data is available, like I have a plugin for advanced custom fields and advanced custom field flex fields, which are like an early version of what page builders are, right?
Right.
Like it's like this with ACF flex fields, you can have what they call layouts, which are essentially like rows, and each row has fields, and they can be like unpredictable at times, right? But within predictable bounds. So you can have different fields, but they're constrained to layout 1, 2, 3, or 4, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So you may not know if it's going to be layout 1, 1, 1, 1, or 1, 4, 3, 2, or 4, 3, 2, 1, but you know it's going to be one of those 4 options or nothing. So GraphQL takes that and builds what's called like a union, which allows you to say, hey, I want a list of these things. And you write what's called a fragment. We talked about that a little bit. And you could say, it's like this ... on syntax in GraphQL. And you can say, I want a list of blocks or a list of flex field layouts or whatever it might be. And on layout 1, I want these fields. On layout 2, I want these other fields. On layout 3, I want these other fields. So there's a level of unpredictability, but GraphQL brings predictability back to that, where you can say, I don't know what it's going to be until runtime, but if it happens to be this, please give me this. If it happens to be this other thing, please give me this. So then you could build applications that can support all of those options. Or like the REST API for advanced custom fields, for example, like you're just going to get some random payload of JSON and you don't really know what it is going to be.
Right. Oh, we lost your audio.
For a second.
Oh, you're kind of coming in and out. Say something.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I couldn't hear you for a second.
Oh yeah, no, you were kind of getting the robot voice there, and then it cut out.
Okay.
But yeah, no, like the predictability of what's coming through the interface is huge. We have to be able to know what kind of blocks or data is coming through. Yeah, and I did a little bit with Elementor and WP GraphQL, and it was really interesting. It did kind of just come down to reading a JSON block and kind of just parsing out the pieces of data and then displaying certain blocks or certain React components based off of what's in there. And it worked, but it's probably not the best way to go about it. But I think it does go to show, though, that like WP GraphQL is extendable, so you can start pulling in other parts of the WordPress database and query for those things, and you can do something random like hook up Elementor to WP GraphQL, which then in my case turned into a Gatsby site. And I think that kind of goes into this next point that I want to talk to you about with is kind of like what WP GraphQL is allowing. It's kind of like, I feel like almost ushering in like a new like way of developing WordPress sites. It's definitely popularizing it, which is kind of the headless approach to WordPress. So what would you say that is, and how do you think GraphQL helps with that, WP GraphQL?
Yeah, so like headless WordPress, if you're not familiar with the term, would be like using WordPress as a CMS where folks log into the dashboard and they manage content. And then instead of using the theme layer that's built into WordPress, you would use something else to render the data that WordPress is managing. So like a very common to digest example would be like a mobile native iOS or Android app, right? Mm-hmm. Native app can't execute PHP, so you're not going to be building actual traditional WordPress themes. So you need to fetch the data somehow from WordPress and render it in native views. So that would be a good idea of what headless is. WordPress is still managing the data. Something else is the head rendering it. So it kind of the iOS, Android app, but a lot of people are doing it with the web now too. So they're building like Gatsby or Gridsome are two popular options. Gatsby is a React-based static site generator. You can also build dynamic apps with it, and Gridsome is a view-based, very similar product. And then Next.js is a Nux.js. Next is a like React, or well, it's not even React specific. I think whatever. Next is like a React-based framework for doing like server rendered React applications, and Nux.js is the Vue counterpart. So those are like 4 popular frameworks for like consuming data from some API. In our case, it would be WordPress, and then building your templates in React or Vue, and then oftentimes outputting those to static pages so that when the end user is interacting with the page, there's no live database connection. It's just a static already built file. So the performance is insanely fast. It's like back in the old days when we actually coded HTML files and there was no, server connection, database connection, all this nonsense. It was just like, here's an HTML file. So stuff was fast. We're kind of getting back to that where we can have a dynamic backend, but the output is static files.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people are driven to things like Gatsby or Gridsome for the performance that you get out of it. And now with tools like WP GraphQL, the developer experience is not that crazy to be able to say, hey, I want to build React components, but get data from this other source.
Which might not be coming from you personally as the developer, which I think is a big plus, is that when you you would think like, oh, well, I'm a developer, I can just get in there and write down my markdown files and call it good. But I think there's so many use cases where it's like it's advantageous to have WordPress attached as the back end of your Gatsby site, because you're right, you do get those statically generated files, you get the prefetching of additional pages, and on top of it you have this CMS that all of a sudden people can enter content into. And I think kind of I did a talk at WordCamp in Salt Lake City, and the example that I liked to give for that was that imagine that you own like a car dealership, and there's going to be a couple different like facets to that car dealership. You're going to have the system where people are entering in what cars are here, entering in what are the prices of those cars, uploading pictures like that. You as a developer aren't doing that. But then on top of it, you have other facets of the business that are going to need that same data. So you have like a centralized place for data. And then let's say you have like an app for salespeople to kind of like mark sales and do that kind of stuff. And that can feed from and feed into the WordPress site. And then on top of it, you have a user facing website where they can have, look at the listings of cars, or have an app or something where they can request keys for cars or something like that. And it's all off of one single, WordPress instance, but its data is broadcast to and from like 3 different like apps, quote unquote. And those apps can be whatever. So I think it's like a huge advantage, because then you can use like Gatsby for the front end of, the site that's user facing, that's customer facing, and they get all of the advantages of that. And then you could also have like the React Native app that the salespeople are using that they can use to mark sales and all that kind of stuff too. So like all of a sudden you're opening yourself up to use the best tool for the job, depending on what the job is. So I think that is huge. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I felt like that was like just a quintessential like example of when headless can become useful, and marrying kind of Gatsby with it.
Yeah.
So what would you say kind of like would be the like some advantages or disadvantages? I guess we kind of talked about the advantages, but would you say like some disadvantages of using a headless approach would, and like how do you see those changing over time?
Yeah, so I mean, right now, some of the disadvantages, one of the biggest disadvantages of headless WordPress is that, like, in a monolithic environment like WordPress, you install something on the back end, and then that code can control inputs in the dashboard, and it can also control outputs in the theme, right? So like you can have like, I don't know, something to manage like social media links in your header, right? And it can input for the dashboard and output in your header via hooks or filters or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you kind of miss out on a lot of that front end stuff if you take your front end off of WordPress. So you can still maintain the data, but then it's kind of up to you to say, how do I want to fetch this from WordPress and put it into templates on my own? At least that's where we're at today, right? I think over time we're going to see like Gatsby has a concept of themes very similar to WordPress. So, but they're only a few months old. Like WordPress has had themes for what, 12 years or something now.
Yeah.
And Gatsby's had themes for like 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, something like that. So I think over time we're going to see themes and theme frameworks come up that have like opinions and pre-built functions and pre-built like things to talk to sources like WordPress and output data in predictable ways that then you as a developer can go tweak. Like Gatsby has a concept called component shadowing already, where like you could install a theme that does 80% of what you like, and then you can shadow components or override components to make it, what you need. Like you could take it that last 20% yourself. So I think we're going to see this market emerge in Gatsby land, where we have themes that talk to WordPress and themes that talk to Drupal and themes that talk to WooCommerce, and get you 80% of the way there. And then you can tweak things that last 20%. But we're like where WordPress was 10 years ago, where there was 4 themes available. So there's a massive marketplace for people to start building this stuff that doesn't exist yet, but would benefit people quite a bit. Like if you're doing e-commerce, like your average WooCommerce site is probably a couple seconds to load the page, maybe 1, 2, 3 seconds, where the average Gatsby site is milliseconds. So it kind of makes sense if you're doing WooCommerce to migrate your site to Gatsby, have the initial time to paint, the time to interactive of your site be as fast as humanly possible, and then let WooCommerce still handle the dynamic stuff. Jeff Taylor maintains WP GraphQL for WooCommerce. He's on this chat, it looks like. He's doing a fantastic job with that, but he does stuff the WooCommerce REST API doesn't do, like add to cart functionality, which is like, why have an e-commerce API if you can't add things to a cart?
Right.
And checkout, which obviously, if you're going to have an e-commerce store, like the 2 most important things are adding to the cart and checking out. And the WooCommerce REST API doesn't offer that. Woo GraphQL does, among all sorts of other things that you just get out of the box with GraphQL. But yeah, he's doing some amazing stuff with that. So I think we're going to see a lot of people move e-commerce sites to static so that users can interact with the data as fast as possible, which everybody knows, like sales increase the faster your e-commerce site is. So I think we're going to see that. But we're going to see themes and frameworks or framework-like themes.
Oh, we lost your audio again. Sorry, Jason warned us about this before we started this, and so we've got a system.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we're good.
No,
we're good. No, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I can't hear you now.
Oh no.
Oh gosh, Zoom.
This is our nightmare.
Okay. All right, I can hear you too.
Perfect. You were just talking about e-commerce, and then we moved to themes. I do want to touch on e-commerce really quick and how like important what you said is, because like now all of a sudden you have a place to manage your products and all that kind of stuff, and then you own your software from top to bottom. If you're using another third party, like Squarespace or Shopify or something like that, I mean, many of us have kind of experienced kind of what happened to Medium, is that like if you post all your stuff on there, all of a sudden their platform can change, or their rules can change and all this kind of stuff. They could, instead of charging like 2.9% per transaction, it could be 5% the next day, something astronomical. And you're kind of stuck on that platform, or at least it's going to be a pain to get off. Whereas like with WooCommerce or something like that, you own it from top to bottom. And if you have something like Gatsby on the front end, now all of a sudden you're taking advantage of, owning your software, and you're getting all of the speed. And just to kind of rehash what Jason said, like that speed is incredibly important when it comes to e-commerce websites. There was a talk at a dev conference recently about how there's like even new phones and stuff like that have ultra not slow processors, but they're internet accessible phones that have just very low powered processors. And so if we're trying to serve them these gigantic dynamically generated sites, then it's going to be a pain for those people to access the sites. And so having it serve up a static page is going to be much more friendly to a wider group of people. All of a sudden you're accessing people who just normally would bounce off of your site because it's too slow. So anyway, I feel like that was just something to point out, is that now all of a sudden by going headless and using Gatsby, you now have a bigger customer base that you didn't have before. But to go back to what you were talking about how there could potentially be a future where we're starting to see WordPress themes or Gatsby themes kind of work together.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a massive marketplace for that coming soon. One thing we're working on at Gatsby too, speaking of this, is Gatsby Source WordPress version 4. Mm-hmm. So currently, if you're doing stuff with Gatsby and WordPress today, there's kind of two ways you could be doing it. There's Gatsby Source WordPress, which use the WordPress REST API to consume data and pull data into Gatsby, and then Gatsby would convert that into GraphQL API, and you would consume, and then you'd write GraphQL queries to talk to the Gatsby cache and build your Gatsby templates. So that all worked with the WordPress REST API. And then I came along with WP GraphQL and was like, why is Gatsby not using this? This makes no sense. So like I was building stuff with WP GraphQL and Gatsby and saying, hey, look, like this is way faster. And so we got to talking, and I joined Gatsby full time to work on WP GraphQL. The next version of Gatsby Source WordPress is going to use WP GraphQL to communicate, one, for a lot of speed benefits and also predictability benefits. So we talked about this earlier, where like GraphQL brings some predictability to your applications. So back to the ACF example, if you were using Gatsby Source WordPress with the REST API and advanced custom fields, flex fields, Gatsby, the way Gatsby would work there, it would download data from the REST API, and they would like analyze the JSON that it got and convert it into a GraphQL schema. But it would look at your post, and one post might have flex fields that was empty. The next one might have a flex field with layout 1. Next one might be a flex field with layout 2. Next one might be a flex field with layout 3 and 4. And Gatsby's like, I have no idea what the heck is happening here. This makes no sense to me. And so like things would just kind of poop out, and like you'd get all sorts of weird errors. And so the only solution was like you'd have to basically go be a professional GraphQL developer on the Gatsby side, and register your schema by hand in Gatsby to make it work with everything. So WP GraphQL solves those issues because ACF.
Oh, we lost your audio again.
Can you hear me again?
Yep.
All right. The Zoom is pooping on me.
Yeah.
But yeah, so ACF, like when you register fields for ACF, the server is aware of those fields, right? And so WP GraphQL can make those exposed to a schema. And so Gatsby Source WordPress v4, Tyler Barnes is working on that. What it does is it uses GraphQL introspection, which is like a way to query the schema of GraphQL. So it uses introspection to say, hey, WordPress, what all fields are possible to consume? And then it does some magic that only Tyler can explain to basically fetch all of that and then cache it in a normalized way. So it would talk to WordPress and figure out everywhere a post is used. So a post might be used in like a dozen places, right? It might be in a list of the author's most recent articles, or it might be a list of post tagged by a certain tag, and it might be a list of recent posts, right? So he's going to cache that post once in Gatsby, and then all these different ways that can ask for that post, we'll talk to the Gatsby cache now instead of talking back to WordPress. So,
oh, that's nice.
And then same thing with images. Like right now, if you're building sites with Gatsby and WordPress, images come up as a hot topic. Like Gatsby has this concept called Gatsby image, or this component Gatsby image, that does some really amazing things for image performance. Like it optimizes images and loads small size and yada 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 to make your pages really fast and your images as efficient as possible. With headless, like it's kind of tricky because in this case we want Gatsby to do the image processing, but in most WordPress sites, WordPress handles the upload and usually resizes when you upload. So it's like, well, do you let WordPress do it? Do you let Gatsby do it? Well, with the new source plugin, it'll allow you to upload your media and manage it in WordPress, but Gatsby will still handle the processing and cache it. So if you next time you make a change to your WordPress content, it doesn't have to fetch all your images and process all the images again, just the ones that have changed. So some really cool stuff like that. So going headless, the friction is dropping quite a bit with the work Tyler's doing, especially. Yeah, so I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, that's great. That's that kind of stuff that I was running into kind of when I was playing with Headless WordPress and Gatsby together. Is the images was a thing, and I ended up figuring out something with Gatsby Node and pre-processing the images and caching them locally, and then in order to even just get the fragment into Gatsby image, and then that's huge. I also ran into something, and I think what you just said might actually fix it, was being able to having to like requery posts. As I was getting like server what I had was had a WordPress site on just kind of like a shared hosting, and then it would just hit the REST API over and over again, and then all of a sudden my server would like blacklist that source and say like, nope, you can't talk to this server anymore, you're requesting too much. But it sounds like what you're doing is you just kind of query it once, grab the schema, and then cache all these posts, and then that way you're not re-grabbing them over and over again. So potentially you could host your WordPress site on a very cheap hosting thing like Bluehost or DigitalOcean or just like a free Google Cloud something or whatever.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you might be able to just throw your Gatsby site on Netlify and essentially have a free to cheap to free complete top to bottom site.
Yeah. There's a host called Shifter. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Mm-mm.
They're a pretty unique model, and I think Stratic is similar to, but they're like WordPress hosts that they're like Dockerized containers, and they spin down when you're not actively using it. So it's like a perfect complement for something like Gatsby, where your front end is separate from your back end. So when you don't have content creators using the WordPress site, it spins down and like is not executing anything. So you're saving costs. It's like serverless WordPress essentially, where like you're only paying for it when you use it. So if you have a small team that only edits content a few times, like why pay monthly fees when you could pay pennies potentially to maintain your CMS, and potentially pay nothing to maintain your front end? Like Netlify is free, GitHub Pages I think is free, S3 is pennies. So yeah, I think that's another reason people are driven to the stack too, is the cost savings.
Yeah, and one thing that I wanted to bring up that you were talking about yesterday is actually the ability to have incremental builds with this new source plugin. How does that work?
Sure. Oh yeah. So so the Gatsby source WordPress that Tyler's working on, the new version V4, does some great caching on the Gatsby side. And then on the WordPress side, there's going to be a complementary plugin, WP Gatsby. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, Zoom is just telling me I dropped my audio. Anyway, so there's going to be a plugin, WP Gatsby, that you'll install, and it kind of like maintains an action log of sorts. So as you save data or delete data or update data or whatever, it'll kind of maintain this log that can be sent to Gatsby. And then Gatsby can just fetch the diff of the data since last time Gatsby fetched, right? So And it'll persist a log so that even if you spin down your Gatsby site or disconnect your Gatsby site for like 2 weeks, and then you spin up Gatsby again, they can say, okay, hey, WordPress, what's changed since this last time that I fetched data? And then instead of fetching, 10,000 posts, it might just fetch the 20 things that have changed. So your data, it'll notify in real time if there's a connection, but then, then Gatsby can kind of refetch increments of your data. So builds will happen much faster. And then Gatsby itself has incremental builds for like code changes as well, which is different than content changes. But that's a general Gatsby thing that we're working on, not specific to WordPress.
Yeah, that in my mind is one of the most powerful features, especially kind of like, because in my current 9-to-5 job, we're moving to headless WordPress in this year, and like one of the things that was a big question was we have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of WordPress posts and pages and images and all this kind of stuff, and we were worried that the build times were going to be to the point where it's frustrating, because if all we're doing is we're making single updates to like a single post, now we're going to have to wait for an entire build. But with this, if it's just checking diffs between WordPress posts and things like that, and you're just making little small tweaks here and there, now all of a sudden that build time goes from however long it would have normally been for thousands of posts down to a matter of seconds. So I think that's one of the best features that's coming out of this, and I'm really excited to see it in action. So maybe we'll have to get you and Tyler on here one of these times to show it off.
Yeah, for sure. One other thing. So to complement like the source WordPress is like the biggest priority right now, is just sourcing the content. But to complement that, we're working on mostly in the conceptual stage right now, but we're working on bringing like theme conventions from WordPress to Gatsby as well. So when you go headless, we've talked about this a little bit, but you miss out on things like conditionals, like is homepage or is single page or is singular, is post type, like all these things that you have at
that we're used to.
Yeah, in WordPress. So you like lose out on some of that stuff. And so we want to bring that in some degree to WordPress. It's probably not going to be like a one-to-one type of thing, but we want to say like, here's concepts you're familiar with in WordPress. Here's how to now do it, like probably with something called like Gatsby theme WordPress or Gatsby, something along those lines. Naming is hard.
That's the hardest part.
but something to that tune. At some point, you'll be able to install and be like, oh, template hierarchy. I'm familiar with this in WordPress, where like if I visit, a slug of a post in my WordPress site, I know it's going to map to this template, right? And then I can change that template. So headless WordPress has no concept of that. It's on you to figure that out right now.
Mm-hmm.
So Gatsby theme WordPress, or whatever it ends up being called, will solve some of those problems where it'll source your data from WordPress with the source plugin, but then it'll actually populate like URLs for you, so that you don't have to figure out how that works. And then things like internal links in WordPress, right, will work in your headless site, because if your Gatsby site, so there's two settings in WordPress, right? There's like your site URL, which is your dashboard, and then your home URL, which is your front end. So if you set your home URL to whatever your Gatsby site is, then anytime you create links internally in WordPress, it'll use that home URL. So your Gatsby internal links will keep linking to your Gatsby site, because Gatsby will be able to build pages based on your WordPress URL structure. So like problems like that, like you have to solve on your own today. But we're working on building things that kind of solve a lot of these hard problems for you, so that you can focus on like the actual end product and not the wiring for it.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about matching what you would expect out of a normal WordPress site.
Yeah. So yeah.
That's awesome. It sounds like you guys got a really good like vision of how you want this workflow to be. So kind of to kind of wrap us up, since we're getting close to when I have to get out of here, but so kind of what do you think that we can kind of see over the next couple years with these kind of setups? Do you think that that's something that we're going to start to see more and more of, is more sites getting onto this kind of headless approach, less sites going kind of the vanilla WordPress route, or do you feel like it's going to be something in between?
You hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I lost your audio, but I think I heard most of you. You said like in the future, do like what do I see in the future? Are more people going to hop on this stack or less people? I still can't hear you, so I'm just going based off your face.
Yep, we're good.
So I think I got the gist of the question. Okay, I can hear you again. Yeah, so I think early on, I think the market for Gatsby and Headless WordPress early on is developers and companies that have resources for developers to put time into this, because there still is friction. But folks like me and Tyler are working on reducing that friction. But for now, like if you want to go this route, it takes development resources, right? So the short-term market is teams that want to reap the performance benefits, or teams that are like very heavy JavaScript, but have content teams that want to use WordPress, but don't want to like pour resources into learning PHP. But in either case, you're probably a developer. We're not quite at a market like WordPress is, where you can just like click buttons and never write a line of code and have like something working. We're not far off of that future. I think 5 years from now, we'll have a no code Gatsby future, where if you want to write code to customize your Gatsby sites, you can. But if you also have no knowledge of coding or just don't want to write code, there will be themes that you can just click a button, install. Tools like Blocks UI. You can, I think, blocksui.com, or you can follow him on Twitter. John Otander, he also works at Gatsby. He's working on this project called Blocks UI, which is like Gutenberg kind of, but for Markdown, or for MDX, which is Markdown plus JSX combined. So it's a really cool project where you can drag and drop Markdown with JavaScript, like JSX React components mixed into it, or I guess Vue too, because I think Vue can use JSX too. I assume it. I don't know. I don't know if it works with Vue or not. I don't want
to. That's out there. You heard it here. Jason promised.
It may or may not. I know it works with React, but anyways, so you can build like these rich layouts and stuff and drag and drop them around without writing a line of code. But since it is React, you can just hop in and write code too. So it's going to cater to both audiences, the very highly technical and the not really technical. Then you can drag and drop your layouts and get the benefits of static sites also. So you get the benefits of dynamic and static, which is just like, this is a really cool future. So where we're at though today, there is no marketplace for Gatsby themes, really. There's no official one hosted by WordPress or a third party that I know of. So I think in the short term, we're going to see that pop up. There is one Gatsby theme that I know of on ThemeForest that's been for sale for maybe 6 months, and they've sold like $40,000 in US dollar sales.
Wow.
So they've proven that people are willing to pay for this type of product, and they're the only one out there. So as soon as we see that kind of mature, I think we'll see third-party marketplaces, and I think Gatsby themselves may toss up a marketplace. I don't know. We're not building something actively right now.
Yeah.
I could see a future where Gatsby wants to be a part of that and facilitate quality themes that you can install very easily to Gatsby. But I think we're going to see that market mature pretty quickly, and then paid plugins as well. And then I think we're going to see like folks like Kellen Mace, who works at Harness. He used to work at Web Dev Studios, is working on WP GraphQL for Gravity Forms. So I think we're going to see like these hybrid plugins that like allow you to do stuff in WordPress and headlessly. Like I imagine part of what he's going to work on at some time, I think, will be like a React component that you can just drop in, and like similar to a shortcode, you could just give it like an ID of a form, and it would be able to render a form for you and then submit the form data via GraphQL mutation. So you'd be able to use that in Gatsby or Next.js or any React application you want. So he hasn't actually built that yet, but that's where I feel like it's going. And I think WooCommerce isn't prime for that too, for a framework to pop up that has like pre-built add to cart templates and pre-built checkout components and pre-built product layouts. And then you just tweak them and then you're off to the races. So it's a market that doesn't exist, but should exist. And if you're looking for something to do, go Gatsby Themes, because like there's people on ThemeForest building ThemeForest themes. Like one of the top selling themes has sold like $36 million
Mm-hmm.
sales. So, and Gatsby is more appealing, I think, to most people than WordPress for a lot of reasons. Like WordPress has done great, but if my site can be 100 times faster, like that's more appealing.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when it kind of directly correlate to the sales that I have on my site, all this kind of stuff. I think you're right. I definitely think that we're kind of in the infancy of kind of what the grand scheme of things could potentially become. I think that there's a lot of potential with all this kind of stuff.
I can't remember if I mentioned this either though. So one thing with the new,
Oh, we lost your audio. Can't hear you. Nope, not yet. No. Say something now. I can hear you.
back.
Yeah, it's back.
Okay. So one thing I forgot to mention with the new Gatsby Source WordPress plugin, anything that you expose to the WP GraphQL schema. So if you use a plugin like WP GraphQL for advanced custom fields that exposes your advanced custom fields data to the WP GraphQL schema, it's automatically a Gatsby source plugin. So your data will be automatically available to be cached and rendered in your Gatsby templates. So all you have to do is register fields to your schema, and boom, it's ready to go. Gatsby can use the data. So it's like it's really cool how it works. Same with like WooCommerce, WP GraphQL for WooCommerce. You can just activate this plugin. All of a sudden, your product data is ready to go for you to just dump into components in your Gatsby site. So yeah, I think it's real cool stuff.
Yeah, sounds like you guys have a lot of cool stuff going on. I hate to cut us short, but I've run out of time. So, but anyway, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I love talking to you. I think you guys are doing a lot of cool stuff, and it's definitely moving WordPress in the direction that I want it to see. Is kind of this modern workflow that we're used to in other areas of the web. So. Kudos to you guys. I really appreciate it, and thanks for jumping on today.
Yeah.
So where can people find the projects, and what can they do to help you guys out with this?
Okay, yeah. So WPGraphQL.com is the WordPress WP GraphQL plugin. GitHub.com/WP-GraphQL is the WP GraphQL organization on GitHub. The Gatsby Source WordPress version 4. You can go to the Gatsby repo on GitHub and search WordPress. I don't have a link to that. I can get it to you to link in the description.
Sure.
WPGraphQL.com/community. You can join the WP GraphQL Slack in there. We have around 1,000 people in that Slack right now. Super helpful Slack. And then Twitter at Jason Bahl, BAHL, and Twitter at WP GraphQL.
Right on. Thanks, man. And then I'm going to selfishly plug my YouTube channel. If you guys liked the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And I do weekly WordPress videos. We're going to be doing a lot more headless WordPress things in the future. I've already got a handful on the channel currently. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, definitely give it a look. But anyway, thanks guys. We appreciate you being here, and let us know if you would be interested in doing some more of this kind of stuff. All right. Thank you.